The rope snapped. For a moment, the crowded execution dock fell silent. The body of Captain William Kidd, already bound and hoisted, dropped hard against the mud-slick timber. The hangman cursed. The ordinary stepped forward, his face pale, his Bible clutched tight against his chest. "Providence," some whispered, "a sign from God." Others saw only incompetence. Kidd lay crumpled at the base of the scaffold, gasping, his neck bruised but unbroken. The tide lapped at the pilings. The smell of the Thames, thick with rot and tar, hung over the assembly. No one moved to help him, no one dared cut him free. The ordinary knelt beside the condemned man and spoke in low, urgent tones. This was not mercy, this was preparation. The rope would be reset, the trap would fall again, and this time it would hold. Captain William Kidd had sailed the world in search of gold. He had navigated the treacherous waters of the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, the coasts of Madagascar. He had been commissioned by lords, financed by nobility, and entrusted with the authority of the crown. And now, on the 23rd of May, 1701, he would hang twice. The crowd pressed closer. Vendors sold gin and hot pies. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. This was theatre. This was justice. This was the price of ambition unchecked and trust betrayed. Kidd's hands trembled as they lifted him. His legs barely supported his weight. The ordinary whispered prayers, but Kidd's eyes were fixed on the river, the same river that had carried him to fortune and now to death. The second rope was tested. It held firm. William Kidd was born in Greenock, Scotland, in a century when the line between privateer and pirate was drawn not in law but in profit. He was bred to the sea. By the time he reached manhood, he had crossed the Atlantic and settled in New York, where he acquired a small trading vessel. His business was not glamorous. He trafficked in rum, sugar, and rumor, but he learned the geography of piracy as intimately as any chart. The hidden coves of Hispaniola, the lagoons of Madagascar, the windward passages where merchant ships grew careless. Kidd was not a romantic. He was a businessman, and his business was survival. His temperament was marked by avarice, but tempered by caution. He spoke often of piracy, not with admiration, but with analysis. He understood its mechanics, its incentives, its vulnerabilities. He believed it could be checked, if only the right man were given the right resources. These observations did not go unnoticed. In the taverns of New York, Kidd became known as a man who understood the pirate trade without belonging to it. He moved among merchants and mariners with equal ease, trading information as readily as cargo. He knew which captains could be trusted, which ports were safe, which officials could be bribed. He was useful, and in the colonies, usefulness was currency. By the 1690s, the seas of the West Indies had become ungovernable. Pirate fleets operated with impunity, raiding merchant convoys, ransoming captives, and vanishing into the maze of uncharted islands. The economy of the American colonies depended on trade, and trade depended on safety. Neither could be guaranteed. Ships left port and never returned. Insurance rates soared, merchants suffered, and the pirates grew bolder. The problem was structural. The Royal Navy was overstretched, engaged in continental wars against France. Colonial governors lacked the resources to mount effective patrols, and many colonists themselves profited from piracy, purchasing stolen goods at favorable rates and asking no questions about their origin. The Crown recognized the crisis. Something had to be done, but the question remained, who would pay for it? The answer came in the form of Richard Coote, the Earl of Bellamont. Appointed as governor of New England and New York, Bellamont was an Irish nobleman of considerable ability and stern principle. His instructions were clear: suppress the pirates, restore order, and do so without bankrupting the treasury. Bellamont was not naive. He understood that official channels moved slowly, that naval expeditions required parliamentary approval, that bureaucracy favored inaction. If piracy were to be checked, it would require private initiative. He consulted Colonel Robert Livingston, a man of property and influence in New York. Livingston had suffered losses to pirate raids. He had a personal interest in the matter, and he had a suggestion. Livingston recommended William Kidd. The recommendation was pragmatic. Kidd owned a sloop. He knew the pirates' routes. He was expendable. If the mission succeeded, the investors would profit. If it failed, Kidd alone would bear the consequences. But the state of public finances was dire. The government could not afford a naval expedition. And so a consortium was formed, a private venture backed by men of rank and ambition. The Duke of Shrewsbury, Lord Chancellor Somers, the Earls of Romney and Oxford, Colonel Livingston himself. These were not minor figures. These were men who shaped policy, who advised the king, who controlled vast fortunes. Their involvement lent the enterprise legitimacy. It also made it dangerous. They raised £6,000, a substantial sum, equivalent to the cost of outfitting a small warship. Kidd was to receive 1/5 of the profits, along with Livingston. The rest would be divided among the investors. A commission was drawn up, granting Kidd legal authority to seize pirates and bring them to justice. The commission was explicit in its purpose. It authorized Kidd to attack and capture pirates, to seize their vessels and goods, and to bring them before the courts for judgment. It was a letter of marque, a legal instrument that transformed violence into policy. But the commission said nothing of accountability, nothing of oversight, nothing of what would happen if the line between privateer and pirate began to blur. It assumed loyalty, it assumed honor, it assumed that a man given power would not abuse it. It was, in retrospect, a fatal assumption. In late 1695, a vessel was purchased and outfitted in London. She was christened the Adventure Galley. She carried 34 guns and a crew of 70 men. She was fast, well-armed, and designed for pursuit. Her mission was simple: hunt pirates, seize their spoils, and return with proof of loyalty to the crown. Kidd assembled his crew with care. He needed men who could fight, but also men who could be controlled. Discipline at sea was always fragile, mutiny was common, and the promise of plunder could erode loyalty faster than any storm. He chose a mixed crew: experienced sailors, former Navy men, opportunists looking for quick wealth. They signed articles that promised a share of any prizes taken. It was a standard arrangement. It was also a recipe for conflict. Kidd sailed from London in February 1696, carrying with him the hopes of his investors and the weight of his commission. The voyage began under favorable conditions. The wind was fair, the crew was eager, and Kidd himself felt the pull of ambition, the belief that he could succeed where others had failed, that he could navigate the treacherous waters of law and profit without losing his way. He would never return a free man. The Adventure Galley crossed the Atlantic without incident. Off the coast of Newfoundland, Kidd encountered a French merchant vessel. France and England were at war, the seizure was legal, the ship was condemned as a prize. It was the first taste of profit. The captured vessel yielded modest spoils: wine, textiles, ship stores. The cargo was sold at New York and the proceeds divided according to the articles. The crew was satisfied. Kidd was encouraged. The mission seemed viable. But the Atlantic crossing had revealed weaknesses. The Adventure Galley leaked, her timbers strained, her crew grumbled about rations, and the prospect of hunting pirates, men who were themselves skilled sailors and fierce fighters, seemed less appealing than it had in London. The vessel continued south to the Madeira Islands, then to Boa Vista and São Tiago in the Cape Verde archipelago. Supplies were taken on. The crew grew restless. They had signed on for plunder, not patrol. Weeks passed without sighting a single pirate vessel. Morale declined. Kidd faced a dilemma. His commission required him to hunt pirates. But pirates were elusive. They operated in remote waters, among hidden coves and uncharted reefs. They had networks of informants. They knew when naval vessels approached, and they vanished at the first sign of danger. Meanwhile, the seas were full of merchant ships, rich, slow, poorly defended, and many sailed under ambiguous flags, their allegiances unclear, their legal status questionable. By the time the adventure galley reached Madagascar, months had passed. The island was a notorious pirate haven, a lawless entrepot where stolen goods were fenced, ships refitted, and loyalties bought and sold. Kidd's mission was to disrupt this economy. Instead, he began to study it. Madagascar in the 1690s was a world unto itself. European powers claimed the island but controlled none of it. The interior was ruled by local kingdoms, the coasts were dominated by pirate settlements, ramshackle towns where former sailors, escaped slaves, and adventurers of every nation lived in uneasy coexistence. Here, Kidd met men he had been sent to capture. He traded with them, he drank with them, he listened to their stories, and he began to see the logic of their trade, the risks, the rewards, the thin margin between survival and wealth. His crew saw it too. At Calicut, on the Malabar coast of India, Kidd made his first illegal seizure. The vessel was a 150-ton merchant ship, sailing under no identifiable flag. There was no commission to justify the prize, no French pass, no act of war. The ship was simply vulnerable, and Kidd took it. The cargo was valuable: spices, textiles, silver. The ship was sold at Madagascar, and the proceeds divided among the crew. Kidd's share was substantial. His conscience, if it troubled him, was quieted by profit. But the seizure had been witnessed. Word began to spread. Reports filtered back to the colonies, carried by sailors and traders who moved freely between legitimate ports and pirate havens. Kidd was not hunting pirates, he was becoming one. The crew sensed the shift. Discipline eroded. Men who had signed on for a legitimate privateering mission now found themselves complicit in piracy. Some welcomed it, others grew fearful. And Kidd, caught between the expectations of his investors and the demands of his crew, found himself adrift. Then came the Quetta merchant. She was sighted off the coast of India in January 1698. A 400-ton vessel, richly laden, sailing under a French pass, but captained by an Englishman named Wright. Her officers were Dutch and French. Her crew were Moorish. Legally, she was ambiguous. Morally, she was a prize too valuable to resist. Kidd ordered the chase. The adventure galley closed the distance. Shots were fired across the merchant's bow. Captain Wright, seeing resistance was futile, struck his colors. Kidd boarded the vessel and inspected her cargo: silk, calico, sugar, opium, iron, saltpeter, gold. The hold was packed. The estimated value exceeded £50,000, more wealth than Kidd had seen in his lifetime. The French pass complicated matters. Under the terms of Kidd's commission, French vessels were lawful prizes. But the captain was English, the crew was Moorish, and the cargo belonged to merchants in India, not France. Kidd made his decision. He seized the ship. The Quetta merchant was sailed back to Madagascar, where Kidd burned the leaking adventure galley to avoid detection and to prevent his crew from deserting. The lading of the captured ship was divided among the crew, with Kidd claiming 40 shares for himself, a sum that dwarfed the shares of any common sailor. He was now wealthy. He was also wanted. News of the seizure reached the East India Company within months. The company had powerful connections in London. They petitioned the Crown, they demanded justice, and they named William Kidd as a pirate. Kidd understood the danger. He could not return to England. The investors who had financed his voyage would disown him. The commission that had protected him was now worthless. He had crossed the line, and there was no crossing back. He sailed not for England, but for the West Indies, hoping to negotiate his return. At Anguilla, he was refused entry. At St. Thomas, the same. Colonial governors had received word. Kidd was no longer a privateer, he was an outlaw. Finally, at the island of Mona, between Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, he found an ally, an Englishman named Bolton. Bolton was a trader, a smuggler, a man who lived in the grey spaces between law and crime. He listened to Kidd's story. He saw an opportunity. Bolton supplied provisions, He also sold Kidd a sloop, a smaller, faster vessel suitable for evading patrols. Kidd transferred his personal cargo to the sloop and left the Quaker merchant in Bolton's care, intending to retrieve her later once he had negotiated a pardon. It was a fatal miscalculation. Bolton had no intention of holding the ship. As soon as Kidd departed, Bolton sailed for Boston. He sold the Quaker merchant to Spanish traders and informed the colonial authorities of Kidd's whereabouts. By the time Kidd arrived in Boston in July 1699, the trap had been set. Lord Bellamont was waiting. Kidd was arrested immediately upon landing. He had sailed into Boston Harbor expecting negotiation. He believed his investors would protect him, that his French pass would justify the seizure of the Quaker merchant, that his service to the crown would earn him clemency. He was wrong. Lord Bellamont received him cordially at first. They spoke in private. Kidd presented his case. He had been coerced by his crew. He had taken only French prizes. He had intended to return and face judgment. Bellamont listened. He asked questions. He took notes. And then he ordered Kidd's arrest. The charges were piracy and murder. The murder charge stemmed from an incident aboard the Adventure galley months earlier. Kidd had quarreled with a gunner named William Moore. The argument escalated. Kidd struck Moore with a wooden bucket. Moore died the following day. Kidd claimed it was an accident, a moment of passion, not premeditated murder. But at sea, a captain's authority was absolute, and a captain who killed his own crew was dangerous. Bellamont wrote to London requesting that a ship be sent to convey Kidd back to England for trial. The request ignited a political firestorm. Kidd's investors were among the most powerful men in England. The Duke of Shrewsbury held high office. Lord Chancellor Somers was a close advisor to the king. The Earls of Romney and Oxford controlled vast estates. Their involvement in the venture had been discreet, conducted through intermediaries, documented in private letters. But now their names were public. Allegations began to circulate that they had knowingly financed piracy, that they had profited from Kidd's crimes, that they had used their positions to protect him from prosecution. Political enemies seized upon the scandal. In the House of Commons, a motion was introduced declaring that the letters patent granted to Bellamont and his associates were dishonorable to the king, against the law of nations, contrary to the laws and statutes of this realm, an invasion of property and destructive to commerce. The motion failed, but the scandal deepened. Opponents of Lord Somers and the Earl of Oxford accused them of complicity. Even Bellamont, who had ordered Kidd's arrest, was suspected of corruption. Another motion was introduced, requesting that Kidd's trial be delayed until the next session of Parliament, so that all documents and examinations could be reviewed. This motion passed. King William III agreed. Kidd was held in custody for over a year. He was imprisoned in Boston, then transferred to London aboard a naval frigate. The voyage took months. He was confined below deck in chains, with minimal food and no fresh air. By the time he arrived in England in April 1700, he was gaunt, weakened, and disoriented. He was brought before the House of Commons and examined at the bar. The purpose was not to determine his guilt, but to expose the guilt of others. Members of Parliament questioned him about his investors, his instructions, his communications with Bellamont. Kidd appeared intoxicated. His answers were incoherent. His demeanor was contemptible. One member of Parliament, who had pushed for the examination, remarked with disgust, "I thought the fellow had been only a knave, but unfortunately he happens to be a fool likewise." No evidence emerged to implicate Kidd's backers. The political weapon had failed. But the trial itself would proceed. The trial was held at the Old Bailey in May 1701. The courtroom was packed. Spectators filled the galleries. Journalists took notes. The case had become a sensation, a story of greed, betrayal, and the collapse of legitimacy. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Witnesses testified to the seizure of the Quedar merchant. Documents confirmed that the ship's captain was English, that her lading was legitimate, that no act of war justified her capture. The French pass, Kidd's primary defense, was examined and dismissed. The pass covered the ship, not the cargo. And even if it had, the fact that the captain was English rendered the seizure illegal. Kidd's defense was weak. His attorney argued that he had been coerced by his crew, that he had acted under duress, that he had intended to return and face judgment. But no evidence supported these claims. The crew, when questioned, testified that Kidd had led the seizure, that he had claimed the largest share, that he had shown no remorse. The murder charge was more difficult. William Moore's death had occurred at sea, beyond the jurisdiction of English courts. But the prosecution argued that the killing demonstrated Kidd's character, that he was a violent man, prone to rage, unfit for command. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Kidd was convicted of piracy and murder. The judge pronounced sentence, death by hanging. Even then, Kidd did not implicate his investors. He did not confess. He did not repent. Perhaps he still believed they would intervene, perhaps he feared retaliation, or perhaps he simply had nothing left to say. Execution Dock lay on the north bank of the Thames, below the high water mark. It was a place reserved for pirates, smugglers, and mutineers, those whose crimes belonged to the sea. The condemned were brought by cart from Newgate Prison. They passed through Wapping, where crowds gathered to jeer or pray. The procession moved slowly. The ordinary of Newgate walked alongside, offering final absolution. Kidd rode with another man, Darby Mullins, a waterman from Ireland who had joined Kidd's crew and shared his fate. Mullins was born in a village near Londonderry. He had worked as a farmer, sold himself into servitude in the West Indies, and survived the Jamaica earthquake of 1691. He had kept a punch house in Kingston, married, been widowed, and drifted into Kidd's orbit by chance. He had taken part in the seizure of the Quedar merchant. He had received his share of the spoils, and now he would hang for it. The scaffold was a simple structure: 2 wooden posts, a crossbeam, a rope, no trapdoor. The condemned would hang by strangulation, not a broken neck. Death would take minutes, not seconds. Kidd mounted the platform. The noose was placed around his neck. The ordinary spoke a final prayer. Kidd stood silent, his eyes fixed on the river. The cart was pulled away. The rope snapped. Kidd fell. He struck the ground hard, gasping, his hands still bound. The crowd surged. The guards pushed them back. The hangman inspected the rope, cursed, and called for another. The ordinary knelt beside Kidd. He spoke urgently, his voice low but firm. This was not a reprieve. This was a warning. The next drop would not fail. Kidd nodded. He did not speak. A new rope was secured. Kidd was lifted to his feet, half carried back to the scaffold. The noose was retied. The ordinary stepped back. This time the rope held. Kidd's body convulsed, his legs kicked, his face darkened. The crowd watched in silence. After several minutes, the struggling ceased. Darby Mullins was hanged immediately afterward. He died without protest. The bodies were left hanging as the tide came in. By custom, they would remain until 3 tides had washed over them. Then they would be taken down, coated in tar, and hung in gibbets at Tilbury Point, where they would serve as warnings to all who sailed the Thames. Captain William Kidd became a ghost before he became a legend. His name was invoked in taverns, in courtrooms, in the halls of Parliament. He was proof of the dangers of privatization. He was proof of the corruption of nobility. He was proof that the sea could not be governed by men who had never sailed it. But Kidd himself, his motives, his guilt, his final thoughts remained obscure. He had been born in Scotland, lived in New York, sailed to Madagascar, and died on the Thames. He had been a trader, a privateer, a pirate, and a scapegoat. He had been financed by dukes and hanged by commoners. His investors escaped, unscathed. Lord Somers, the Duke of Shrewsbury, the Earls of Romney and Oxford, all retained their titles, their wealth, their reputations. The political scandal faded. The profits from Kidd's early prizes were quietly divided. The Quader merchant vanished into Spanish hands. Her cargo was never recovered. Rumors persisted for centuries that Kidd had buried treasure somewhere along the American coast, but no such hoard was ever found. The executions at Wapping did not end piracy. They did not restore order. They did not clarify the law. But they did establish a precedent. The state could sacrifice its agents. It could disown its privateers. It could hang a man twice if necessary to prove a point. The gibbet at Tilbury Point displayed Kidd's tarred corpse for years. Sailors passing in and out of London would see it swaying in the wind, a blackened reminder that the Crown's mercy had limits. Eventually, the body decayed beyond recognition. The chains were cut down, the bones were lost, but the story endured. Captain William Kidd remains one of history's most infamous pirates, not because of what he took, but because of what he represented: the collapse of legitimacy, the failure of oversight, and the ease with which a man could slip from servant of the state to enemy of it. He sailed under a royal commission, he hanged under a royal warrant, and in the end, the difference between the two was nothing more than profit, suspicion, and timing.